Welcome to Lattes and Art, presented by J Squared Atelier, the podcast where creativity brews connections and deeper conversations. I'm your host, James William Moore, and today we're exploring the transformative power of portraiture in telling women's stories. Not just the joyful ones, but the complex, challenging, and even traumatic experiences that shape who women are. Our guest is Susan Harding, an artist whose interdisciplinary and mixed media approach to portraiture gives voice to these nuanced stories. Through her work, she not only celebrates womanhood, but also addresses the layers of trauma and healing that often remain unspoken. Through her artistic process, she seeks to create space for dialogue, reflection, and healing. So let's get started. Today, I'm thrilled to have one of my favorite people with me to chat. Susan is this incredible photographer that does portraiture. And welcome, Susan. I can't wait to get into this with you.
Thank you. I with that introduction, I feel like I have a lot of pressure now.
No pressure.
To be amazing.
You come by that naturally.
This is why we're friends.
This idea of portraiture has this big history. Like, we have these artists all through the ages that have been doing portraiture. What is it about right now that you're doing portraiture? Why? What drew you to this?
I think I've always been attracted to portraiture, drawn, compelled to make pictures of people, images of people. I think that my father was a landscape photographer. And so I felt like that's what I was supposed to do. But I noticed as I went along that all my images had people in them. And I like to have people in them because I think it feels warmer and more welcoming or something. I don't know. I can't describe that. But I think for me, the series that I'm working on right now and the way that I'm working with portraiture right now is to tell stories about people. And portraiture for me, I think in particular, the kind that I'm doing, I think is important right now because we all have trauma and we all have flaws and we all have things about us that we don't like, but other people see us differently, maybe, and sometimes more critically and sometimes more gently. And so what I'm trying to do is take a critical look at us as human beings through a gentle lens so that we are able to open up dialogue about the critical things, but recognize also that everybody has these traumas or flaws.
But your work is kind of specific too, is it not? Are you not just doing portraits of women right now?
Yes, I am. Right now, I am just doing women. And I feel like for me, it's important to do women's portraiture right now because women are often historically pushed to the sides or viewed through the lens, the masculine lens. We think about paintings like Odalisque, where, she's on this chaise lounge and, we're looking down on her and it's very seductive. And I think that often that's the way that women are portrayed. And, some of us are like that. Some of us want to be portrayed as seductive and we want to feel attractive and sexy in that kind of way, but that's not everybody. That's not, and I think that being seductive through the lens of a woman is really much different than through the lens of a man. So for me, that's why I find it important why I feel compelled, driven to work on this series that I call The View, because I think it's important for women to both be seen and to feel seen and to be seen in ways that they want to be seen, not in the ways that the world wants to see them.
Well, and it's interesting because as you were starting to explain, the ideas behind the portraiture that you're looking at is addressing some of the traumas that these individuals have gone through.
Right.
And you talked about how a male lens is different in that it's more from an objectification of whatever that is.
Typically. Not always.
Not always, yes. I know. I
yes.
generalized on that one.
I do too, though. I do too. So I just want to make sure.
I enjoy how you have used, like, some of us want to be pretty, some of us want to be seductive. And that's inherent, that we're all that already. These portraits that you're doing, you're kind of peeling that layer off and looking a little closer at the person, are you not?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I definitely want to try. And I think, kind of circling back to the original question, I feel like I started this particular series when all my life I've worn baggy clothes and dark clothes and tried to hide and be inconspicuous because I didn't like the attention that I got from men in particular. And then, we went into COVID, and I emerged from COVID in this menopausal body. And instead of an hourglass figure, I had this menopause girdle that replaced it. And then I was all of a sudden invisible. So, before, where, I was getting the cat calls and the whistles and what have you, then the doors were slammed in my face. And all of a sudden, now I'm saying, but wait, I still want to be seen. I just don't want you to see me that way. And so it occurred to me that perhaps other people felt the same way. And so I started talking to people and discovered that some of the traumas that I have, that for the purposes of this conversation, we'll set aside. But some of the traumas that I had, other people had those same traumas. And so then I wondered, how do these traumas inform who we are as people? And knowing what my traumas were and why I hid, why I didn't want to be seen, how did that inform who I am as a person and how I carry myself, how I present myself to the world? And how does that translate to other people? Do we speak the same language in that? And can I find other people who speak the same language? I think, and I found it really important to not just be superficially beautiful, take pictures that are pretty, because I think that doesn't tell the whole story, the way that we want to present ourselves to the outside. I put together a questionnaire that was just a loose questions that I might ask somebody, and then met with them and talked. The first several people that I worked on this series with, I talked to them about, what made them feel beautiful and what made them feel unattractive, and where do they think that came from? Where do they think their ideas were formed? And then as I'm talking with people, I'm exposing my flaws and my skeletons that I have in the closet. I don't know, skeletons probably isn't the right word, but the trauma that happened to me that I keep hidden in my little box where nobody can see. So many of those women have the same little boxes full of trauma that they were hiding and protecting. And it manifested different in the way that they presented themselves. Some, unlike me, were, more flamboyant and more bold because they wanted to take control. And so I found it really interesting in talking to these women about their ideas, how they did that.
You're talking about these individuals and the traumas they're going through and how there were some that were similar to your own.
Right.
It feels to me that you're creating a space for these stories to exist, regardless of whoever experiences it. Is that reasonable?
My goal. I mean, that's what I hope for in the series, that I can create a space. And I found every single woman who, without fail, who I've gone through the process with, because we have to be, there's a lot of layers to it. They have to, one, be comfortable enough to expose themselves to me about what their real flaws are and where these ideas come from. So they have to be comfortable enough to me to be bare, whether that means with no clothes on or just their essence of who they are, to be exposed that, because it's a very vulnerable process that we go through. So they have to be comfortable enough with me for that. They also have to be comfortable enough to allow their story to be told. Every single woman without fail has told me that they feel like going through the process was the best therapy they've ever had. And it is for me too. I found it to be, I can't put myself in their body and know how they feel. But for me, I think it was more healing for me because, one, I learned I'm not alone. And because I learned I'm not alone, I feel even more compelled, more driven to continue the series. Somebody asked me, I'm just going to circle back for a second because this is how I talk in circles. But somebody asked me one time, why are you so interested in telling women's stories? Because, you know, the feminist movement and, you know, we're so far advanced and, you know, all the things, like we're on equal playing ground now. And first of all, we are not. But second of all, I think that I felt so alone in the situation that I was in. I felt so alone and so isolated in my own trauma box that I felt afraid to talk about what happened to me. I just thought I was alone and I didn't know who to talk to or how to talk about it.
In the woman's experience, which obviously I'm not able to speak from, but I've had many friends that have come to me and opened up to me. And I can only imagine, one, how hard that is to open up to someone else when you're talking about a victimization, a trauma, a situation that isn't safe, any of these kinds of things. Mm-hmm. But then suddenly being in that group and realizing you're not alone.
Yeah. And that's why I feel more compelled to do it, because I think that there's so many people who are still stuck in that box. And I'm only freshly released from the box, you know, to realize that I'm not alone, only because for whatever reason it was, I felt compelled to do this series. And, you know, maybe it was because I wanted to get out of the box. Maybe it was because for selfish reasons that I wanted to. And that's possible.
Well, you did something really interesting when we were going through COVID.
Uh-huh.
And you were doing your porch portraits.
Yes.
And I loved this idea that you were trying to find a connection through an isolating time.
Yeah.
And now you've gone another step. You know, we're not isolated socially as much unless we choose to be.
Right.
But you're now taking that story and bringing new light to it and new voice. And I think it's amazing that you allow this opportunity for others to share in that experience. You used a word, feminism.
Yeah.
The feminist art movement. And I want to just ask a question. Do you feel this work is part of that movement, or do you think it's something different?
You know, I think that the F word is a really scary word to use. Do I feel like I'm part of the movement? I hope so. I really, really hope so. Because, you know, I personally believe, you know, having lived in this body that I've lived in all my life and presenting as a cis femme woman and a lesbian, you know, I just need to add that part in there because I think it's an important part of who I am and an important part of, you know, another one of those things that fit into that trauma box that, you know, I was 30 before I realized that I'm not alone on that because I thought I was alone. I thought I was the only one that existed back in the day, you know, before we had all the representation on TV and radio and wherever, walking down the street, right, expressing themselves. I didn't have that. So I thought that I was alone. I thought there was something wrong with me. You know, it's feminism that pushed that forward, I think, to, you know, among other things. And I don't want to say it's just feminism that did, but I think feminism was a pushing force to allowing women to cook in the kitchen and be a homemaker or be a chef or be a lawyer or a doctor. And I think that we've come a long way, baby, but we still have a long way to go. I think we still have a long way to go. And I think that now it's kind of the little things, like the smaller stories that, you know, women who feel like, you know, this is who I think I'm supposed to be. And I'm not. So what is wrong with me? Or, you know, this happened to me, you know, late at night when I was walking down the streets, this traumatic event happened, which, you know, I'm not going to talk about. But I think we can all imagine what those kind of events might be, you know, and why do I deserve that? What did I do to create that? And I think that that's the one thing that I want to change as I do this series is it's not the woman's fault. It's not a woman's fault to curb the urges of a man. It's not a woman's fault to dress in certain ways that make them not be attracted to her. it's not my responsibility to carry myself in a way that doesn't get me raped. And so I think that for me, that's probably the driving force behind the series.
I'm hearing what you're saying, and I love that it fills in some space for me. Having been someone that got to see your show that you had up, that had these amazing works. But then I think back to someone like Mary Cassatt, who was ahead of her time.
Right, right.
And she was invited to be a part of the Impressionist movement. And she was showing the stories of the women. And there was class issues and there was gender issues and these things that she very gently and kindly brought the world's attention to.
Right, right.
In the world at that moment. And I can see where what you're doing now is continuing that kind of work.
Wow.
We need to have that voice.
Thank you.
That tells me and others that these stories are real, they exist, and they're not one-offs.
I think focusing on the part where you felt included, I was surprised when I had the show up, how many men came to me and said, I can so relate to this work because I feel like I don't fit inside the box. I feel like I don't belong in any kind of space. And this work shows me that I don't have to. And I was so surprised by that because I didn't think that my work would be relatable to men at all. I thought only women would really understand what it was I was trying to say. So thank you for saying that, first of all. Second of all, comparing me, or putting me in the same bracket, I don't even have words for that. I feel so honored to even have my name mentioned in the same space. So thank you.
We've studied art history. We look at these amazing individuals. And I think a lot of time, especially in Western art, it's the male. It's the white male.
Yeah, yeah.
And when someone comes along that starts a movement, and, whether it's a Judy Chicago that does the table, or it is Cindy Sherman, who is kind of jamming the idea with her movie film stills. Yeah, you play in that realm because you are allowing us to see these stories through your eyes, both as someone who has maybe experienced these traumas, but someone that is able to tell somebody else's story through this visual.
Wow. I really want to try to remove myself. I want to take myself away and only tell the women's story, but I think it's impossible. It's absolutely impossible to take away all the experience. And you and I have studied together. We've come a long way, together on this art journey. And studied a lot of the same artists, I think, and different artists that we've come together and talked about. And I find that fascinating, and I cherish our friendship.
Men have come into the space where the show has been. They can relate. You are telling the stories of these individuals that are so powerful visually. Do you think because there's that coming together that it's kind of breaking down a stereotype?
Ooh, wow. I hope so. Really, there's going to be stereotypes always, but I really would love to break free from them. And I feel like maybe in our lifetime, it's not going to happen. But if we take steps,
little step by step, right?
Change gets this made. One thing here, this one thing there.
I want to go back to how you talked of when you're doing these stories of these people that you try to remove yourself, but you don't think it's possible.
Right.
That is exactly what I teach my class,
wow.
That you can't remove yourself.
No, you can't.
Early on, you talked about empowerment.
Yes.
And that these are helping these individuals and that it's been a kind of therapy and in some ways, for some, the best therapy to come out of this. How has that felt for you?
I hope that it's successful. Yes. Let me take away all those things that I was taught where I can't say, yes, I feel like it's successful. Yes, I can.
This is my podcast. We get to say anything we damn well want to.
I mean, and it's kind of the stereotype, right? Women are trained that we're supposed to be humble and, not supposed to be boastful. But I do think it's successful. I feel like it's helped me every bit as much as it's helped those women. Sometimes I feel completely drained after a session of talking to a woman and listening to their stories and crying with them or laughing, and sometimes laughing through tears. It's difficult to go through that with them.
You and I are kind of similar in that we start with a camera.
Yeah. Yes.
But it doesn't end there for you, does it?
No, it doesn't. No,
Talk to me about where it goes and how it gets there.
So the long story is that I'm a photographer and I'm taking classes at school, and I have to take a drawing class. And I go into this drawing class throwing temper tantrums and fits, and I had to ask, the instructor asked us to say why we're there. And I said that I'm in the class because I want to be a photographer. And in order to be a photographer and get a degree, I have to take this drawing class. I don't want to be here. I'm a photographer for a reason. I can't draw. I don't know what I'm doing in this class, but I'm here. And she told me, her name is Julie Hughes. If you can take a class from her, then I highly recommend it. She said, Susan, if you will follow my directions, I can make you draw. And I said, can we make a bet on that? Because no. So I did. I followed her directions, and lo and behold, I can draw. I can't doodle, but I can draw. I understand shadow and light, and I think that comes from my background in photography, that I really understand where shadows go, where light is in looking at that. So, and that's really all drawing is you're drawing shadows and lights in shapes. I mean, that's all it is. I learned that I can do that. And then, I don't want to give up photography, but I also don't want to give up drawing. So I sat around and brainstormed with myself, how can I put these two together? And another instructor that I had, Eric Friedman, I had a class with him, and he said we had to do 3 large drawings. And I said, what if I print an image really big and I tear it apart and I draw the missing pieces? Does that count? And then glue them all back together. Does that count? And he said, absolutely. And I said, but I don't think I can do this. And he said, but I think you can. And if you don't, then at least you tried. Okay, so here I go. So the first one of these drawings that you're talking about that I did was 5 foot by 2 foot, huge, 18 by 24 pieces of paper behind that I drew in the missing pieces. I think it was a success. I think mostly what the success was that it instilled this spark of creative energy that just ignited into this huge inferno, and I cannot stop now. I am incredibly amazed by how you can highlight a story sometimes so subtly that people don't even recognize that the story's there unless you talk to them about it. And they ask you, why did you do this? And you say, this is why. And they say, oh, wow, that's just amazing.
Do you consider yourself interdisciplinary?
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. In particular, because I draw with charcoal, which is super messy and super unpredictable. And, photography is really kind of neat and clean, and everything is pristine and white gloved, and you handle everything so carefully. And I'm combining this really clean, neat process with the super messy.
You rule breaker.
Yeah, totally.
So you've torn the photograph, which we are told you are
absolutely
not
never
to do that
yeah,
to
yeah.
a photograph.
The first time I did it, I was so scared.
But how does that then, when you're doing these portraits of these individuals, these women, how does that tear play into the story? And
it's different in every single story. I'll just talk to you about one woman. Her name is Susan also. I love Susans. I've photographed several. Susan is older. And when she said one of the things that she told me when we were talking about what her story was. So she said when she looks in the mirror, she feels like she's looking at somebody else's face, like she's wearing a mask of somebody else. So I thought about how can I best tell this story? So I photographed her from the side. I cut the front of her face off in the photograph and drew the front of her face and glued it back together. So it's a mask, but it's a mask of herself. And I think that the image by itself is lovely. But the story about the mask, I think, makes it more compelling. And I think it's more, I feel like the drawing and the time that it takes me to draw, I draw them photorealistic, the time that it takes me to draw and the way that I'm touching them and handling them with care, the hours that I pour into, I feel like, one, I really know every single thing about these women that I've drawn because I am staring at them for so long. And I draw with makeup brushes and charcoal powder. So it's layers and layers and layers and tiny little details that just take a long time. And I think that it's not just the story of the two pieces coming together, but the time spent and the touch and care that go into the drawings that also make the story.
It's an empathy that you bring to this process, that you are putting hand to paper. They've exposed their soul to you, and you have very gently told their story in an incredibly beautiful way.
Aww.
When I saw the show and saw the different pieces that you had specifically done these treatments to, mm-hmm. they are extremely powerful to see in person. So if anybody ever gets a chance to see these when Susan shows them, be sure to get out there and see it, because it isn't exactly collage, but it is.
I've struggled with what to call it. People ask me all the time, what do you call this process? I have no idea. I don't know. It's two pieces coming together. Is that collage? Collage feels, I don't know, maybe not as delicate as what this is, but really it is what it is.
Well, I think too with collage, a lot of people go back to like Hannah Hawk and Dada, and you're clipping weird things out of a magazine to make a political statement.
Yeah.
And in some ways, yes, some of what you're doing might be considered a political statement, but there's this gentleness, there's this sort of femininity that's being brought to this that I think takes it beyond just moving away from the male lens.
Totally. And speaking of the male gaze on the show, when I put together the show, I deliberately took the women off the wall because I didn't want them on the wall to be objectified. I placed some of them on the wall, of course, but most of them I had in the center of the room. And then I placed mirrors. So as the viewer walks through, they're forced to, one, feel the gaze of other people as they're looking in mirrors at them. And so many mirrors that it's almost an uncomfortable space. And then all of the women, they're looking right at the viewer. With the exception of a couple, like Susan, who was looking off to the side, but she still looks strong and powerful, I think. But, I want the women to be gazing back. And then as you walk through the gallery, you see the women looking at you also. The gaze of the woman also I took back.
You have said early on in this conversation about how you didn't feel alone as you started this process. You were seeing that there were other people. Have you put yourself in front of the camera, or have you remained behind directing this process?
Oh, I am so behind the camera. I'm so behind the camera. And actually, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I was just having a discussion about putting myself out there also. And it's a really scary thing. It's easy to be gentle and kind and accepting of somebody else's story. But I am afraid to stand in front of my own lens because I might see myself and I might be seen in that light. And how do you tell your own story? And how do you be gentle with yourself? But then, again, goes back to this is the whole reason I'm doing it, because none of us are gentle with ourselves. We all have the same issue when we turn the lens, our own lenses, whether we look at it through a mirror or picture that somebody took where we're being critical, of, this belly's too big or back to the menopause girdle. But, my arms, I have those flaps underneath. I could fly myself to New York.
Bingo arms.
Yeah. So, I think it's time to do that. I'm not quite ready yet, though.
Okay, so I asked that question because as I mulled over what I saw on your show, mm-hmm. I was realizing you weren't in front of the lens.
Right.
But then we have Cindy Sherman.
Right.
Who does nothing but put herself in front of the lens.
Right.
And the reason why she is such a role model for me, who also puts themselves in front of the lens,
Right.
is that it's not always my story.
Right. Right.
Would you ever consider, if you were to have someone that decides that maybe they want their story told, but they aren't truly comfortable being in front of the lens, would you be their surrogate in that moment?
Oh, that's a really interesting idea. I don't know. I don't know if, as the maker, I would feel comfortable being a surrogate. I think I could bring in a surrogate to tell the story, but I don't know if especially because I'm really trying to remove myself from their story, take myself out as much as possible.
Got it.
Even though it's completely difficult. I do want to mention to you that in my show, I was in that, in the corner, disguised as a camera head, my self-portrait.
Oh, that is right.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite drawings.
Yeah,
because it's so stunningly beautiful. I forgot about that.
Yeah. But I'm hidden in the corner watching.
You're watching.
Yeah.
It's interesting because we as photographers watch.
Yeah, all the time.
We're those voyeurs that have that lens in front of our face.
Totally.
That separates us from our subject.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. My wife asked me one time, do you ever stop taking pictures? And the answer is no.
Of course not.
Immediately
It's what
no.
we do.
Yeah, no.
How do you navigate challenges of portraying these women with diverse backgrounds and experiences while ensuring an authenticity to their story? And this might be removing stereotypes, right? You and I, we come from a white background.
Yeah. Really, really white.
But I've seen the subject matter that you have photographed, and it is a very diverse background. How do you feel you have navigated? How have you navigated some stories that may be culturally different from you?
I very carefully, and I ask a lot of questions because I don't want to tell the story wrong, and I don't want to tell the story in a way that doesn't represent who the person is, both culturally, emotionally, and physically, how they see themselves. So I would just say gently and asking a lot of questions. And I'm working on one image in particular right now of a Muslim woman. And I don't know much about the Muslim religion or culture of this particular person's from Palestine, which is probably heated and maybe not difficult to talk about right now. But I think it's still at the same time important to tell her story. Even in this time, I think it's important because I think that there needs to be humanization of what's happening currently in that region on both sides. There needs to be humanization for us to understand that it's difficult for everybody. You know, talking about Palestinian scarf and what does it mean and how can I use that scarf? Is it, am I appropriating if I use it in my work? And is it disrespectful if I use it in my work? I think just really carefully and again, asking all the questions,
It's interesting because we are Western civilization.
Yeah.
We have these institutions that we have learned within. And I think it's interesting because you brought up that particular image that you're working on right now. And now more than ever, you talked about, humanizing. Mm-hmm. But the reality, it's reminding we're all human.
Yeah, we're all human. We all have trauma. Right. And we all have stories, every single one of us. Absolutely.
Do you feel that portraiture in the way that you're doing it is the best way to tell this story?
God, I don't know if that's the truth, but it's the only way that I know how to tell the story. I can't tell it in any other different way. This is my language.
Now, for some that haven't seen Susan's work, when you're doing these portraits, mm-hmm. Are they studio? Are they staged in a home? Are they outside in the forest? What are you using for the backdrop?
Both, on all of the above. I think it all depends on the woman. And the majority, I think, are in the studio. I think studio lighting is easier to control, to light in ways that highlight the parts that we want to highlight. And also there's a vulnerability. Many of the images have implied nudity. The studio provides the best security and comfort to make the women feel and seem and appear on camera comfortable. Because if they're not comfortable, they don't look comfortable. So they have to be comfortable. And so I think the studio is the best for that. I have photographed in people's homes, and I do have plans for an outdoor shoot, but it's a fully dressed. So I think, and not as vulnerable of a shoot. So
it's interesting how you talked the vulnerability piece, and I can totally see where in one's studio, you've created a safe space.
Yeah.
Their outside world is not coming in.
Yeah.
So it almost feels like those chains kind of fall away from them.
Totally. And I think the studio is a space. I mean, I am really comfortable in the studio, and it is my second home. But really, in reality, nothing of me is in there. I don't have pictures of my family or anything like that. So it is kind of a neutral ground for both of us where we can stand as equals in that space and not, the hierarchy of the photographer and the subject.
Well, and it's interesting you talk about that because there is a hierarchy when a camera comes into it. We have so much power of what is being photographed. Absolutely. And how it will look. How do you get them comfortable with that camera?
I have no idea. I have no idea. I honestly don't know what I do. I can make up something I think I do. And maybe somebody who's been in front of my camera can correct me if I'm wrong. But I think for the most part, I'm a rambler. I like to talk a lot. And I have no problem talking to anybody about any subject. And I think that already first of all, we already have a relationship, a really intimate relationship, because we've talked about our traumas before we came in and talked about what do they feel comfortable with? What do they not feel comfortable with? And almost like the safe words. You tell me when to stop. If you are ever uncomfortable, let's just stop, because I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. It's not what this is about, is being uncomfortable. Unless it's a story you want to tell. Right? If that's who you want to portray, then let's make you uncomfortable. But I think for me, I just try to act like the camera's not there and talk over the camera and try to maintain eye contact and minimize how much I look at the camera. Sometimes do I miss a shot? Absolutely. Because of that, right? But do I get the genuine emotion from whatever's going on between the two of us without the camera? Absolutely. So I think that's a thing I just try to humanize and minimalize the camera as much as possible.
So all this effort that you're putting into this to get the photograph to start before you even begin, if you're going to do one where you have torn it and add the drawing, you're putting yourself into that person's spot, aren't you? In some respects, that you're trying to hear them, feel them, and make sure that is a visual that comes into the lens.
Absolutely. I think empathy, is what you're talking about, plays a huge role in all of this. In all of this, it plays a huge role. I try to put myself in their shoes and understand what it feels like. Because I think that's the only way. I really have to know them. And it's really the whole process from beginning to end takes about 3 months. And when people first say, "Oh, I want to do this," I'm like, "Yeah, it's a lot of work." It's really beautiful, right? But I don't think you really realize, because we have to have a relationship before we can even walk into the studio or decide if the studio is where we're going to be. I think that, it takes some time, and I've tried to rush it a couple times, and it's a huge flop. It just doesn't work, because I thought I need to have new work. Let me just work. But, it's just not something that can be rushed. So, yeah, I think I do put myself and empathize with them. I put myself in their place.
Does that emotionally drain you as you go through this process?
100%. 100%. When this whole thing first starts, we have a quick meet to say, "Hey, this is who I am. This is what I expect of you. This is what I'm hoping for. And if you are okay with this, I'm going to send you a questionnaire, and I'd like for you to fill the questionnaire out, be as honest as possible. And, it's this questionnaire is in the trash when we're finished. Nobody's going to see it, but you and I, unless you want them to, right? It's just something for us to get the ball rolling. And then after that, we meet and we talk for 1 to 2 hours. I come up with questions. This is stuff that I find interesting or compelling about whatever it is that they answered, however they answered something. And sometimes it's stuff that they don't even see themselves, that they don't even realize is really powerful and really touching. And so then we talk about that. And then I go back into my own space by myself, and I think about what we've talked about and look at my notes and try to come up with shot lists. And then we talk about, okay, this is a story that I see, and this is how I'd like to photograph this. Are you comfortable with this line of photographing? And here's kind of a generalized shot list, which I almost never stick to because they're great ideas, but once you get into the studio, I don't know about you, but when I'm shooting, I think I want to do this one thing, and then I get in the studio and I'm like, oh my God, look at this. This is amazing. Let's go in this direction. And sometimes it's completely different than it is when the idea that I had when I walked in.
Yeah, you get in that moment and it becomes organic.
Totally. And I think that that's what makes the best photography, when it just happens organically. Of course, you have a framework that you're working inside, and you have to have the framework, and you have to be prepared to work inside that framework. But once you get there, it's kind of like we were talking about earlier. You have these rules that you're supposed to follow. And then you learn the rules and you work the rules, and then you're like, oh yeah, let's throw the rules out the window. Who needs rules, right? We don't need this anymore. So then and then we talk about what the shot list is. And then we talk about the next thing that we talk about is wardrobe. How do we tell your story with wardrobe? Do we need to have a makeup artist or hair, somebody come in to help you with that? Or not, right?
Well, and that plays into the beauty.
Totally.
That may be part of their story.
Absolutely.
And the one thing that it doesn't do is automatically put it into an objectification.
Oh, for sure not.
It's just another chapter in the story that you're trying to tell.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
We have been all over the place in this conversation, which
That's normal.
I love when we get together and do this. And it has been thrilling getting to know better what it is that you're doing with this particular project. But as we close this out, I got one last question for you.
Okay, I'm ready.
In the climate that we have right now, politically, socially, we've talked feminism. We've talked that there's still things that women need empowerment to.
Right.
Do you feel that this project has a bit of activism in it?
Yes. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I hope it does. Yes, it does.
But not a soapbox sort of.
No, I definitely don't want a soapbox. But I feel like, let's just talk about the election that's happening right now. We're talking about the potentially the first woman president, but we should just be talking about a president. It shouldn't be an issue that it's the first president that happens to be female. Should just be.
Right.
It should just be.
Exactly.
It's kind of like we've talked before. It's not gay marriage. It's just my marriage, right? I don't have gay breakfasts. I happen to be gay.
It's called brunch.
Yeah. It's called with champagne. But so yeah, I think there is some activism to it. And I think that that's important. It's part of it.
It was something that I saw right from the beginning when you were doing this. You're giving voice to those individuals that may not have had it before, which then puts this out into the world for others to see.
Right. And hopefully gives them a voice too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to me, that is the most beautiful place to be in activism as an artist.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying that.
So, Susan, thank you so much for being with me.
It was an absolute pleasure.
I look forward to doing this again.
Yes, please.
Maybe after the Mary Cassatt visit.
Yeah.
To the museum.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about Mary. Yeah.
Thanks again.
Okay. All right, I'll talk to you later.
That finishes up today's cappuccino and this episode of Lattes and Art, presented by J2Atelier. A huge thank you to Susan Harding for guiding us through the intersection of portraiture, storytelling, trauma, and healing. Her work shows us how art can offer a space for both reflection and empowerment, capturing not just the light, but the shadows that shape us. Be sure to check out Susan's work. Those links are available in the show notes. If today's conversation has inspired you to explore the stories hidden within your own creative practice, we encourage you to lean into the process, however imperfect it may feel. And be sure to subscribe to Lattes and Art for more thought-provoking conversations that highlight the power of creativity in all its forms. Until next time, I'm your host, James William Moore, and I hope you keep creating, keep healing, and always find beauty in the journey. Until next time, cheers.